There is no red, white, or blue in this country. The only color that matters is green because we live in the United Corporations of America.
Hey, this is Ashley Bishop with Status Coup. I am here with Zaina Day. We are here for the Status Coup live stream. We apologize for our kind of extended absence for the last, week and a half, maybe 2 weeks. Zaina and I have both been sick. Zaina also is in the same area where the massive tornado hit almost 2 weeks ago now. So we're going to talk about all of that and what Zaina has seen and experienced, as well as the kind of like corporate media-led exploitative disaster coverage that we see now with every natural disaster. So we're going to talk about all of that first. And we are also going to talk today about the Supreme Court decision from yesterday to reject a challenge from tribal communities who are hoping to keep a proposed copper mine in Arizona that would destroy a sacred site used for tribal ceremonies from actually going into operation. So we're going to talk about that. We're going to talk about ICE continuing to terrorize everyone, including a high school student, and their use of AI to do so. Israel's continued genocide of Palestinians. They're stealing more of the Gaza Strip and using aid, so food and basic necessities, to essentially lure Palestinians in, who are already completely beaten down and starving, into camps. We are also going to talk about those who are protesting the genocide, who continue to protest the genocide and are resisting here in the US, including our own John Farina, who currently is suing Brooklyn College with 3 other journalists for barring their entry to cover a protest at Brooklyn College. So we're going to talk about that. We're also going to talk about some breaking news here regarding visas, as well as Jordan's latest piece for Substack. So definitely stay tuned for all of that. We have a lot to get through today. So first, I am going to turn it over to Zaina so she can tell us about her experience with the tornado that hit so close to her home in Kentucky like a week and a half ago.
Yeah, so some of you may know I am from a small community in eastern Kentucky, London, Kentucky, and Laurel County, Kentucky. And some massive, massive tornadoes ripped through St. Louis. I'm sure some of you guys are familiar. There's a tremendous amount of damage done in St. Louis City, literally ripped through neighborhoods in St. Louis. The same storm front. The storm front made its way to Kentucky as well, and it hit Pulaski and Laurel counties. But this particular tornado was an F4 tornado, 170 mile per hour winds, and traveled for 60 miles.
That's insane.
Yes,
that
totally
is
crazy.
I mean, not to interrupt, but like I can't remember hearing about F4 tornadoes. I mean, that sounds crazy. And 60 miles, like that is insane. That the scope of that is kind of like almost, it's just so large. It's kind of unimaginable.
And they said it was one of the worst, weather reports are saying that it's one of the worst tornadoes in modern US history. But
Wow.
it ripped through. And Colin, I think you may have a couple tweets for us that can show some of the damage, but 20 people have lost their lives in my hometown of London, Kentucky, tragically, which is extraordinarily heartbreaking. You can see from the satellite imagery, that is the Daniel Boone National Forest. That line is the tornado's track through the woods. That's a scar that it made that was nearly a mile wide through the woods. So we have that devastation in our actual wildlife as well. That's the one lake to the left is Lake Cumberland, and the one to the right is Laurel Lake, which is where we live. And it ripped right between those two lakes. So it's not a road, that's the path of trees that were downed, just flattened like matchsticks all along that pathway. And I think there's another image or another tweet there. Yes, and this is
Oh
what
my
the
God.
Sunshine Hills neighborhood in London, which I used to live very, very close to. This is
Mhm.
about 2 miles from where I live now. Luckily, I'm more toward the north end of town, and this is the south end, but it knocked homes entirely off their foundations. You can see what it did to the woods there. It knocked homes entirely off their foundations. One of the trailer parks, Finley Trailer Park, was hit. A beautiful neighborhood. It's devastating. There were some homes that are just the entire foundation is gone. It's just a hole in the ground. Um, and one of the things
Crazy. I mean, that's crazy. That kind of devastation is even looking at it, it's kind of hard to connect. Even being able to see the scope of it and seeing the, satellite imagery and all of that and seeing the line going through, I mean, it's still very hard to fully grasp, like, what a disaster this really has been.
and it hit late at night, so a lot of people were unprepared. There were rumors going around that a lot of Democratic pundits were saying that the alert system was turned off because of the Trump administration. That's not accurate. And I
Okay,
think that that's a
okay.
problem. We did get alerts. We did get alerts, but it was so late at night, some people were already in bed by the time that the alerts came, and that was really the problem. Um, Although earlier in the day, Andy Beshear, our governor, the governor of Kentucky, had already declared a potential state of emergency and had been warning about the storms. But people have busy lives. People have a lot going on. Not everyone
Sure.
can hear that. And it made me think out west there a lot of places have storm shelters in many neighborhoods. They're kind of prepared for this kind of devastation to a certain extent, as much as they can be. But in places like Kentucky, Missouri, that was hit, I believe Arkansas was hit a few months ago with massive tornadoes, scattered, that caused a tremendous amount of damage. There's not as much infrastructure in place. And yes, with the cuts to NOAA and now the cuts to the National Weather Service, we may see rolling and scaling back of what we're able to track and see with weather, and with these increased storms. That's a great deal of concern. Um, I One of the things that we're going to get into in just a little bit, but the first night, the first couple days, I wasn't able to go to the area, and I opted not to go to the area and film just before I'd gotten sick, because my local community had been inundated with TikTokers coming to the local area, with
Oh,
people
wow.
coming to film, kind of getting in the way of cleanup crews, with national film crews coming. And some of that people were grateful for, but others said, this is getting in the way of actual cleanup. And this is my community, my hometown. And even as a journalist, I
Right.
didn't want to feel like I was exploitating that. I wanted to be sure that I covered it the way that Status Coup covers these incidents, and that is making sure that people are getting the help that they need. We often will go back on the ground later and track these kinds of disasters and follow up, rather than just filming it and leaving. And we'll get into that in just a minute. But before we get into that, I wanted to share a couple of stories that you may only see if you're right there and it's your community, but I found these are somewhat hopeful. One of the things is our community all came together. People came from the Tri-County area. They came from all over the state. People were coming up from Tennessee, coming down from Ohio, coming from West Virginia to help with this cleanup, which was amazing to see. So, so grateful for that. But the debris field that was created by this tornado spread debris from the Sunshine Hills neighborhood in that area in 150-mile radius.
That is crazy. That is crazy. I mean, if you're going to drive 150 miles, that's like uh, 2.5, 3 hours. It would take you to drive from like one end of that debris site to the other. Like that is very far.
Mhm. Yeah, absolutely. And you know, some people lost their lives, which is devastating and tragic, and of course the most important. But people also lost their memories, their belongings, their treasures, their
Yeah.
connections to their family in the form of photos, Bibles, you know, keepsakes. And I have a couple of pictures here. There were people posting photos that they found in their yards. People posting from all across. We had people in Hazard, which is 75 to 90 miles away from the area that I live, posting pictures from places like Perry County that fell in their yard. This guy's wearing a South Laurel jacket, which is I went to North Laurel High School,
Oh,
but
wow.
South Laurel High School is my local high school, so I recognize that as like a local photo, but it was discovered all the way in Perry County, and there were so many pictures like this, hundreds and hundreds of family photos, some that are, you know, 75, 100 years old, family Bibles, family heirlooms, wedding rings, all kinds of things found. And another aspect to this story is that countless number of pets were scattered all across the county,
Ugh,
people not
that
able
is
to
so
find their pets,
heartbreaking.
not able to locate them. So one of the things that some community organizers started doing is partnering with different rehoming centers and
Mhm.
humane society and others to house these pets, feed them, and created a website, lost or a page on Facebook, Lost Pets Found, to start reuniting families with their pets. And dozens and dozens and dozens of families were reunited with their pets, and some are still looking for them. Some people are still in the hospital injured and their pets are missing, or family members are finding their pets. So that's one part of the story that you might not see in a disaster. You know, not only is it family that you're worried about and your belongings and your home and your stability, but these parts of your life that mean something, your belongings, and also your family in the form of your fur babies, right? And you
Absolutely.
can see here this photo, North Laurel, that's where I went to high school, as I was saying. This photo was found all the way over in Pikeville, Kentucky.
That that is crazy. That is
And
crazy, and
another
it
one here found in Hazard. Yeah.
No, no, go ahead.
Oh, no, I was just gonna say another one here found in Hazard. And one of the things that I think is so beautiful about this, Ashley, is that the people finding these in their yard are cleaning it up, posting it, offering to have them, you know, cleaned up professionally and mailing them back to people. One person found a wedding dress, another found a
Oh my
quilt, you
god.
know, cleaned them up, mailed them back. There's something so beautiful about, I found these items, I'm going to take care of them for you. I'm gonna take the time to post them, and I'm going to send them back to you. So even though you've lost so much, here's a little piece that I can give back to you. And I think that's such a beautiful story.
That really is. That really is. I mean, those are all such, like, unbelievably sweet gestures when people need them the most. And I know, like, if I lost my house, if I lost my apartment, those are the things that I would be missing. I would be missing my photo albums. I would be missing, a book that I got from my grandparents that's been passed down in my family. Like, those are the two things that would come to mind for me, that if something happened to them, I would be devastated. You can replace other things. You can replace other things. You cannot replace, items like that. You can't replace photos. You can't replace family heirlooms, like a wedding dress and a quilt, like you said. You can't replace your pets. I mean, it goes without saying. And for people to have lost so much, and then on top of that, be maybe in the hospital, be injured, for people who have lost their lives, to also not know where your pets are, is, I mean, that must be devastating. I would be completely broken if
Someone
that happened.
lost their mother, and their mother had a little terrier. They found the terrier in a tree, alive,
Oh
but
my.
was able to reunite it with the woman's children, and that broke my heart. It was the search crews were searching and searching and searching for that puppers, and then they
Yeah.
did find him. I can't believe that The puppers was in a tree. That's horrible, but alive and doing well now and reunited with the family. So that family lost one family member, but was able to reunite with such a connection to the person that they loved.
Yeah. I mean, that's wonderful to hear. It's wonderful, like that they were able to be reunited with, their mom's pet after losing her. It must be some small consolation. I
Another thing that I noticed, oh, sorry, Ashley, go ahead.
no.
Some of the things that people need were very interesting. They needed wheelbarrows and tarps and wood and shovels and gloves. And so people were sending a lot of things that could be used, like water and clothing and that sort of thing.
Which is
Um,
that's what I would send. I would think, oh, people must need water and clothing and like, diapers and things of that nature. But I wouldn't think about like sending tools and wheelbarrows.
Yeah, and work gloves and stuff like that. And I remember after North Carolina, that was one of the things that they were saying that they needed. Like, we got so much of this and it's very helpful, and we need the diapers and we need the pet food and we need but we also need stuff to help us with the cleaning up aspect of it. Now, for now, FEMA has come down. We're still unsure what kind of help people are really going to get in the area. So we'll have to wait and see. And I'll do some coverage through Status Coup and keep up with that, just like we did in East Palestine, just like we did in with the wildfires in LA, just like we have done with, I know, what was it? 8 months ago, we did a tour, Jordan and I believe Colin, and there was another reporter in North Carolina that was covering what was happening there. So that's one of the things, and I'd love for you to share the article that you were going to bring up. But one of the things that's so important is that there are news agencies on the ground that are covering more than just what people call, destruction porn or, you know, uh, ambulance chasing. And Status Coup does so much more than that. It's so much of this mainstream media will film this for a second, and it can be important to help bring resources that community needs. But after the sensationalism, they're gone. And those people are forgotten about.
Absolutely. Absolutely. I mean, that is, like you said, we need the news to be there, or at least to be covering a thing, right? They don't need to be there to be in the way. They don't need to be like, we don't need TikTokers like on the ground after a tornado, after a wildfire, after a hurricane. You're just getting in the way. You're getting in the way when people most need like attention focused on, recovery efforts of whatever form they're taking in that moment. You're not helping in that sense. And it's all of this coverage kind of just amounts to that. So I think you're right. What Status Coup does best is following up on the ground, and if not on the ground, at least following up periodically after all of these disasters happen. So you mentioned East Palestine. We have a follow up to that coming out soon. So, we're staying on that. We also are more than likely going to have a follow up to the LA wildfires coming soon as well. So, like, we're staying on these stories. We will stay on all of them. And I think so. The next link that we're going to share is a piece from Jacobin. It's actually something I wrote in the beginning of this year after the LA wildfires, and I wrote it because of the way that the media was treating the wildfires. It was, as you said, Zaina, it was disaster porn. It was, we're coming in, we're showing all of these action shots of our reporters on the ground where it matters. Meanwhile, as soon as the thing is over and people are left standing around going, okay, well, what do I do with my life now? My house is gone. I lost all of the things that I lost. They are nowhere to be found. They are not following up on the recovery efforts. They are not following up on rebuilding when people need that continued support. So this piece was, again, in Jacobin. The media covered LA's climate disaster like an action movie. And it just so happened the editor I was working with on this, Megan Day, who is wonderful, she lives near here. So she was also being subject to, watching the kind of useless news during this time. And I remember her saying that the news was not really informing her of anything. So there was, there's all this like coverage on MSNBC and the like of these disaster shots and all of that, but nothing actually useful to residents who were being evacuated. So that was, another reason that this piece came into being, out of, frustration from people who were in these areas who found media coverage to be useless for what, you would think its purpose would be. So I'm going to read just a little bit of this piece. So again, this is from January. Officials don't yet know the initial cause of the fires that began ripping through Los Angeles on January 7th, but we do know that a hotter and drier climate created the perfect conditions for multiple massive wildfires. 2024 has the distinction of being the first year on record to average 1.6 degrees of warming, and it seems that 2025 will follow suit. For those clued into the climate crisis, watching LA burn feels like a sign that the predicted climate collapse is already upon us. But you won't find reflections like these in the mainstream media. Since the LA fires began, cinema-quality shots of reporters leading viewers through the flame-ravaged landscape have filled the media sphere, while climate change has taken a backseat. You would be forgiven for thinking you were watching a behind-the-scenes special for an action blockbuster, not the real-life burning up of the planet. Our team is in the fire zone tonight as the flames rage tonight, said Lester Holt, opening NBC Nightly News on their first night of fire coverage on January 7th. Across the networks, reporters dressed in fire-retardant gear braving the growing flames. One reporter screamed to be heard over raging fires as houses burned all around him, and a cloud of black smoke swallowed the sky. Reporters walked through lanes of abandoned cars left by residents forced to flee the flames on foot. Reporters intercepted residents as they fled their burning homes, some clutching a few cherished possessions. One journalist reported on special counsel Jack Smith's resignation in front of smoldering remains. I'm remembering that now. It was terrible. Another took viewers on a drive through his old neighborhood before FaceTiming his own mother in front of their old house, which had burned down. Reporting on danger inside the fire zone, read one Chiron. Graphics depicting flames and embers preceded title cards reading 56 plus square miles burned and 12,000 structures damaged or destroyed. So again, like that is what the coverage was at that point. The coverage of the fire itself was more of a backdrop to show us, like, look at how skilled our reporters are. They're so unafraid. They're in the fire zone. They're right in the middle of the action of everything. Meanwhile, those lanes of cars were real. Like, reading through that, I remember the coverage that I was watching as I wrote about that, and just thinking, this is so heartless. It's so heartless. It is so detached from the actual suffering on the ground. And it's just like this weird, I don't know, cognitive dissonance between watching them cover a thing and covering, again, like lanes of just abandoned cars with fires, running parallel to those lanes of cars, and knowing that it is so disconnected from the people who had to flee their cars on foot to not be burned alive in a fire. And I go on to say in the piece, it's, sorry, I'm scrolling a little bit ahead.
The coverage of celebrities' homes too over all the other neighborhoods was also infuriating to me. I mean, I had a lot of people that I know in that area that was getting constant alerts, fires right very near to where they were, the concern, and it felt like a lot of the coverage was literally just this celebrity's home is now, in the crosshairs. And I'm not saying that that's not important. Anyone's home damaged is a tragedy, but there were a lot of neighborhoods and a lot of displaced people that I felt like were being ignored.
Absolutely. Absolutely. I remember all of that coverage and being outraged by that too, because you're right. It's like everybody's home who was destroyed, that is a tragedy. But at the same time, those people that we're centering the coverage on, they don't have a second, they have second homes to go to. And all of the other people in those neighborhoods that we're not focusing on, they don't have anywhere to go. Like, they were looking for hotels, they were staying with relatives, friends, anywhere that they could. They lost everything. Like, they didn't have anything left. Those celebrities, again, like, I'm not happy that they lost their homes. I'm not going to cheer for it necessarily, but they have resources. They have money. They can replace those things easily. They can replace those homes easily. And again, that's probably not even their only home.
Right.
So to focus your coverage on that is callous. It is callous and sad. And part of the other thing that was so frustrating with all of this is I will read from here. These scenes are deeply affecting, and sadly, such utter devastation lends itself well to such cinematic representation. But in the process of framing the biblical and apocalyptic inferno, cliches that are too sensationalist to effectively communicate the deep trouble we are in, they have failed to use the words that do still mean something: climate change. Between January 7th and January 13th, the phrase climate change was not mentioned once during regular weekday coverage on NBC's nightly news, despite the broadcast devoting at least half of its airtime to the fires every night. On January 11th, at the very end of its Saturday coverage, NBC did mention that 2024 was the hottest year on record, and a special edition of Nightly News, Fire and Ash, Devastation in LA, which aired on Saturday, January 11th, did mention climate change once, ponderously wondering if it might have had something to do with it. ABC's weekend editions on January 11th and 12th likewise mentioned climate change during two brief segments, though not during its weekday coverage. ABC also devoted at least half of its airtime to the fires every night. After January 7th, it was roughly the same for CBS. So again, they're talking about these. They loved saying the inferno. Like, I remember that was like the word that they were using. That was the trendy word. So they love talking about the infernos. They spent most of their coverage on it during weeknight coverage, and they were not talking about climate change. It's like,
Right.
how do you do that? And who is that coverage then for? Who is the coverage for? Because you are failing to educate your viewers. If the point of this news is to tell viewers what's going on, you're not telling viewers what's going on if you're not talking about climate change. If you're not saying what the cause of the fires are beyond, we had drought conditions, it's dry. Well, why is it dry? Why are we in a drought? We know why. There is a thing that you can say that would kind of tell people what is going on there, and they failed to do that. And another reason I wrote this is because the first segment that I watched on this, I was watching with my younger sister. And she and I were talking about it, and I was kind of telling her why I found it to be kind of infuriating. And and I asked her, like, what are you getting out of this? As someone who, she's not a reporter, she's a nurse. So for someone like her, like, what is she actually getting out of this coverage? And she said, well, I just want to know what's going on. I want to know what's going on. And that was kind of it. And I said, well, they're not telling you what's going on, right? Like, you're getting a partial story here, that if they're not talking about the actual cause of the fire, you don't know what's going on. So I think it's, this kind of like disaster coverage is useless no matter which way you look at it. No matter what you think the point of the news is, you're not getting what you should be getting.
True, absolutely. I completely agree. And there were websites that were actually reporting the updates during the fire, and it was very similar to, people reporting on the storms that hit St. Louis. There was not enough national news coverage about the storm itself that was still raging on. Not to say that the destruction in St. Louis should have been ignored. It shouldn't have. But there wasn't enough national media coverage. We were watching Ryan Hall, y'all. Ryan Hall's awesome. If any of you guys don't know who he is, he did cover some of the the fires in LA as well, and was keeping people abreast of updates while that was happening. But he is a meteorologist who has a meteorologist team, and they have a YouTube channel, and they will track these storms all night long. He worked, I think, a 12-hour shift, a 12-hour live stream covering this storm in particular, similar with the wildfires. This guy saves lives every single day doing the work he does, with people, meteorologists on the ground. He's an actual meteorologist, and it's independent. It's independent meteorology, which is crazy. And of course, he uses official places and radars and stuff like that to track this, but keeps people updated. And that reminds me of exactly what you were talking about with the wildfires. People were going to these independent channels to find out where these alerts were coming, what alerts were happening, what neighborhoods were being impacted, because the mainstream media, even though they were covering it constantly, the corporate media were not covering where people need to go, where these, centers are, where they can get help. They were just, it was all sensationalism and no substance.
Yeah, and no follow-up. No follow-up. I'm sure that we are going to see that, and I know that there's, been some kind of developments in. I shouldn't say this story, but there's, I've seen things coming out about the health effects that the LA wildfires have left behind. So, I haven't seen anything on that, at least not from corporate media, and I don't expect to either.
Yeah, it's the similar with the battery power plants, or what happened in East Palestine, or it's gone as far back as Hurricane Katrina, Hurricane Helene. There's it's these places just get forgotten, but the areas are still continue to be ravaged for decades later.
Absolutely. So we will follow up. Zena is there. She will be following up and letting us know like how things are going on the ground, how the rebuilding efforts are going, and all of that. So we'll keep our attention on it, and the people who are suffering, and we'll continue to, without, I'm sure, with all of these natural disasters happening in this political climate, it's all the worse because there are far less resources and all of that. So we will keep an eye on it.
Well, if all communities pulled together like this community did here for everything that we need, we would be doing we'd be doing a lot better as a nation. But again, when 60% of the country are in the adjusted poverty, are below the adjusted poverty line, it's hard for people. So
Absolutely. If you are unable to take care of yourself, take care of your family on a regular basis without like extreme struggle, when you are faced with a disaster of this scale, it is all the more difficult to do that.
yeah, that's why federal resources are so important.
Absolutely. So the next thing that we wanted to cover was this last Supreme Court ruling. So the story on the Supreme Court ruling was to decline to hear a challenge from a nonprofit, Apache Stronghold, to prevent a copper mine from gutting a sacred site in Arizona. And this is from Tuesday, so yesterday. So the coverage that we are going to go through with you guys is actually from NBC News. It is a little long, so please do bear with us. I do think it's important. I did a video yesterday on many of the other attacks on tribal communities led by the Trump administration and Trump's kind of like longstanding vendetta, which seems tied to his casino business in the 90s. So if you haven't watched that, please do check it out, because this is a story that, we're covering, and it's not happening in isolation. All of these things are happening all at the same time. So again, this is another assault on tribal communities and their religious freedom. So this is from NBC. Supreme Court spurns Native American religious claim over copper mine on sacred land. The case revolves around a sacred Apache site that would be destroyed if the mining project goes ahead, pitting religious rights against business interests. So the Supreme Court on Tuesday rejected a last-minute plea from Native Americans seeking to challenge a massive copper mining project in Arizona that would destroy a sacred site used for tribal ceremonies, a weighty dispute that pitted religious rights against business interests. That is a very judicious way of saying profits over people and profits over everything else and everything that people care about. The court turned away an appeal brought by the nonprofit group Apache Stronghold, asserting that its members' religious rights will be violated if the Resolution copper mine goes forward because it would obliterate Oak Flat, the site in question. The Trump administration recently announced its backing of the project, which is now set to move forward. Vicky Pesce, general manager at Resolution Copper, said in a statement that extensive consultation with tribes has already led to significant changes to the project. Pesce added that the ongoing dialogue will continue to shape the project. I would just comment to say that it sounds like the only resolution that they, or change that they could make to the project would just be in stopping it entirely. Like, there's no change here that could be appropriate in this instant. If the copper mine is going to, like, a giant copper mine is a giant pit. It is a giant pit where copper is mined for. That is going to destroy the entire area. So
Absolutely.
yeah, like the idea that, you know, they've listened to the Apache people, and they can still, you know, maintain their religious rights and still use the site when it's become a massive copper mine. That's not a thing. That's not a thing. And whatever they have said, you know, that whatever they would say in their ongoing dialogue to continue to shape the project, also not a thing. I would imagine that the ongoing dialogue to continue to shape the project would be, we still don't want this, and we are fighting against it. A member of Apache Stronghold said in a statement, the fight would continue. While this decision is a heavy blow, our struggle is far from over. We urge Congress to take decisive action to stop this injustice while we press forward in the courts, he said. So the court order noted that conservative Justice Samuel Alito did not participate. It did not say why. Conservative Justices Neil Gorsuch and Clarence Thomas said they would have taken up the case. Gorsuch, known for his backing of Native Americans in other cases, said in a dissenting opinion that it was a grievous mistake not to hear the challenge, and suggested the court would have acted differently if the claim were brought by Christians. Just imagine. I'm sorry, go ahead.
Oh, no, that's just interesting that Gorsuch took that stance.
I thought it was interesting too. That really stuck out to me, and I appreciate that. You know, if he is saying that the court would have acted differently if the claim were brought by Christians, I mean, that's a pretty powerful statement to make coming from him.
It's true.
Yeah, and he said, just imagine if the government sought to demolish a historic cathedral on so questionable a chain of legal reasoning. I have no doubt that we would find that case worth our time, he said. Faced with the government's plan to destroy an ancient site of tribal worship, we owe the Apache no less. I mean, again, I think that's a great statement to make here. Unfortunately, he has been totally overruled, so they have decided, again, they will not hear the case. So, you know, that doesn't really help here, though I appreciate, you know, his standing up for I think what we would all think is probably right. So the focus of attention is a law passed by Congress in 2014, which transferred the land from federal ownership to Resolution Copper, a joint venture of mining companies Rio Tinto and BHP. Resolution Copper says the mine could supply around 25% of the nation's copper, with the metal in high demand for renewable energy projects and electric vehicles. And again, Apache Stronghold said tribal members' religious rights were violated both under the Constitution's First Amendment and a federal law called the Religious Freedom Restoration Act. So they're saying that this copper mine would be able to supply the country with around 25% of the nation's copper. So that's it. Like that's I would assume something that is playing in the back of their minds as they are refusing to hear this case.
But we don't even know if that claim is accurate.
That's it. That's
the amount of copper, because they've made arguments. We saw similar arguments made for the Willow Project and the Mountain Valley Pipeline when it came to oil and gas, and we've heard claims such as, oh, fracking in Indiana and Kentucky and West Virginia will be able to supplement 80% of the country, and that ended up not being true. So when they say this mine supply so much percentage of power or so much percentage of whatever resource, I'm always extraordinarily skeptical of that.
I think that's fair. I think that your instinct is probably very right on that one. 25% is obviously quite a bit. And they do make sure to mention, it would supply 25% and also would be used for renewable energy projects and electric vehicles, things that, people who would tend to oppose projects like this are largely in favor of. So
Well,
we would
there's
like to see more renewable energy projects, but also, we should not all be fooled. Just because it's renewable energy doesn't mean that it is coming from a clean, not exploitative source.
right. And there's a tremendous amount of copper in landmines, a tremendous amount of copper in landmines, from copper piping, from electronics, from a litany of sources. Landfills themselves are basically a copper mine haven. And a lot of poor people have gone and collect and sometimes go in and they'll take the copper from these sites and sell it, thinking instead of utilizing those resources and looking there so that we can reclaim some of that land, take back, renew, going directly to Native Americans land. And there's one other thing I wanted to mention, and that is this is from the executive order and the domino of executive orders that came after. And it didn't mention this in the article, but the Trump administration are making these arguments regarding public parkland and national parks, state parks, as well as indigenous land under the guise of the National Energy Emergency Act, stating that any lands that are public lands or even indigenous lands could potentially be sold off in order to do any type of mining activities, gas, oil. And then he had an executive order specifically about gas and oil and another one specifically about minerals and mining. And there are stipulations within that could also open it up where private lands can then be taken by the state for for mining, mineral rights lost. And if you think about it, okay, if this was a state program that was going to be state funded, that was employing state, it had a federal jobs guarantee under it, and not for this particular mine, I'm against this copper mine, but for other projects, there could be a potential, sometimes positives with that. However, these are private corporations. They're going to steal your land, steal the land in our national parks, in our state parks, indigenous land, and then sell it off to corporations. It will not be state-owned. These projects are not state-owned. The people that are doing the mining on this indigenous land, the copper mining, is a private institution.
Yeah, of course. No, nobody but these companies are going to benefit from this. And they're going to do everything they can to make as much money as they can off of it. Jobs will be created, like you said. It's for them. It's for them. And again, it's profits over everything. It's profits over the Apache people. It is profits over the environment, because a copper mine is not going to be good for the environment either. So it's it is all around a bad deal for everyone. And talking about the land there, and I think part of this was that the land was not under ownership of the Apache people. So I think part of this was that it is federally owned land, and they turned it over to Resolution Copper. But we're talking about land and tribal communities, and whether the federal government feels it has ownership over it is questionable. And the NBC piece does say the U.S. originally took control of the land in the mid-19th century, so took control of the land. It signed an 1852 treaty with Apache chiefs that pledged to protect tribal interests, but as with other treaties with tribes, the government failed to live up to its obligations.
Of course.
So allowing, this sacred site to people to be destroyed is not upholding their obligations to these people. And it seems like, that is just the story with every treaty that we have with First Nations, that we are not upholding our end of the bargain.
No.
So, yeah, this story is, again, not happening in isolation. This is happening while a whole litany of other things are happening, other attacks happening on Native American communities. So we should, and this is another story too, that like things like this are falling through the cracks as far as coverage goes. And this is another thing that I think Status Coup does well, trying to shine a light on things like this while people's attention are turned away to, you know, Trump renaming the Gulf of America. We now have the Gulf of America. People are turning their attention to the, you know, next absurdity that comes out of his mouth, the next, you know, very real in your face thing that the administration is doing. And things like this do not get the coverage that they deserve because people only have as much bandwidth as they have, to be generous here, right? So I think this is another thing that we should be following up on and keeping our eyes on, because it's certainly not going to get any better. And if we don't talk about it, then there is opportunity for things to just get all the more worse for already vulnerable communities in this country.
Yeah, we have to be aware of what's coming.
Absolutely. Absolutely. So the next story that we wanted to talk about is ICE. So we have a couple ICE-related stories here. I think the first one that I wanted to talk about is so this story is from Chalkbeat, New York. So this is about a Bronx high schooler showed up for a routine immigration court date, and ICE was waiting. So that is the title of this piece. So the Bronx high school student from Venezuela was trying to do everything right. Dylan, 20, fled his home country last year and turned himself in at the U.S. border in April 2024. Through a Biden-era entry program, he requested asylum and was permitted to enter the country while he awaited a court date, allowing him to obtain a work permit and driver's learner permit, according to his lawyers and his mom, Riza. He joined his mom and two younger siblings in the Bronx, finding part-time work as a delivery driver to help Riza scrape together enough money to move the family out of a city-run homeless shelter and into their own apartment. And even though he had already finished his high school in Venezuela, he enrolled in a Bronx high school that caters to older newcomers determined to continue studying and make it to college. So when Dylan's mandatory court date arrived last Wednesday, he and Riza had little hesitation about showing up in person as instructed in Lower Manhattan, assuming it would be a routine check-in, according to Riza, who asked to use only first names for fear of retaliation from immigration authorities, which is a very, very real fear. So I'm going to skip ahead in this piece a little bit to talk about what happened at their actual court date. There is a section that says a court date turns into handcuffs. Normally, a court date like Dylan's would have been relatively straightforward. But when Dylan and his mom arrived at immigration court at 290 Broadway in Lower Manhattan, the government lawyers made an unusual request. They asked the judge to dismiss the deportation proceedings against Dylan, according to his mom and lawyers. But when Dylan's deportation proceedings were dismissed, his asylum claim was too, leaving him without legal protection and allowing the government to initiate an expedited removal. If the family had a lawyer present, they might have been able to oppose the request to dismiss or might have more fully understood the possible repercussions, said Dylan's NYLAG attorneys. But Riza said she had looked in vain for an attorney before the hearing and could not afford a private one. So I'm just going to stop there. They do give some details that I do also want to read about what actually happened to them, because it sounds fucking terrifying. But here's, some 20-year-old, some young person who came here and their focus is on going to school. And like the article says, and I think Chalkbeat did a good job with this, and kind of, laying out who this kid is, who the family is. He already went to high school in Venezuela. He came here. He's trying to continue his education so he can set himself up to go to college, to have a good life, to have the American dream, to have all of those things that, we love to talk about here that are available to anyone who tries hard. This is a kid who is trying hard, who, if we had a functional, actual meritocracy, he would be winning, right? He would be winning it. And the way that his family and he have been treated here is atrocious. I don't know.
this idea that he's in quote unquote illegal citizen or an illegal alien, as the spokesperson from the Trump administration claimed within this article, is something that is outrageous when you consider that he came over, he had his legal paperwork when he came over and was awaiting a court date. He stayed, and one of the claims that Republicans, claims that Republicans make regarding immigration is they're not going to show up to the court date. How many times did you hear that from the Biden or from the people that were in the House under the Biden administration? They're not going to show up to their court date. That's a problem. This is why we can't have a court date resolution for individuals to show up. Now the Trump administration are just labeling anyone who came in under a legal program at the time as quote unquote illegal aliens, which that's just false. He wasn't. The people, ICE is showing up at to arrest the people that show up at their court dates because they're easy targets.
Yeah.
So the people there, it's the exact opposite of who they claimed that they were going to be deporting. They said they were claiming they were going to deport people who avoid their court dates, people that have criminal records. No, they're showing up at the courthouses to arrest people who are trying to do everything legally.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's just crazy to think about it like that. Like, here's a 20-year-old kid. He has no criminal record. You know, they go on in the piece to say that like he was a homebody. He was just taking care of his like much younger siblings. That was it. That was his life and school. The kind of person that you would want here. The kind of person that, you know, I would want to know. Like, and the idea that, like you said, those are the people that we're targeting at their, you know, routine like check-in meetings, that's sick. Like it's sick. And it just like nobody who has a criminal record is going to be showing up to those meetings or showing up to their court dates.
It's lazy. It's just there was another article that claimed that they are now trying to, that ICE announced today that and the Department of Homeland Security, that there is a new attempt to deport. Their goal is 3,000 people a day.
A day.
3,000 people a day, which sounds like utter and total BS, but they're skirting our constitutional rights of due process, the Fourth and Fifth Amendments already. And so what's next? How many? And one of the reasons that they're showing up at the courthouses like they are is because they're not actually going after people with criminal records, with that sort of thing, because they have lied about the percentage of migrants that carry out crime. They have lied to us that it's the per capita, the percentage of crime is lower among undocumented and documented migrants. Lower. There's less people that commit crime than the per capita, you know, the documented U.S. citizens. So they have to show up at courthouses because there's less. That's the easy way to find people. And what's sad about that is that's going to make people too fearful to then go to court, and then that will give them an excuse to be able to. You're screwed no matter which way you go in these circumstances.
Absolutely. And you know, you're really just forcing people into hiding. That's what's happening. You're forcing people underground. What, and like you said, like what option do people have at that point? You can't go to your court case, your court hearing, your court date, because you are worried that you might get arrested and deported and sent to an immigration detention center. And then if you don't, like you said, then you're screwed too.
And think about how crazy it is that he had to go to court to verify documentation, and because there had been there was some questionable documentation, had to go verify it, had to go clear everything up, and the judge is like, "Yeah, you're good." But because it was no longer in process, then that opened it up for ICE to then step in and deport him afterwards? Makes no sense.
No, it doesn't make any sense. It makes no sense, and it seems like this is like a new tactic that they're using to circumvent the law and beyond the law. Like, what is right? This person, like, this poor kid was not here illegally. He was going through the process. He was doing what he was supposed to be doing. What we say that you can do to become a citizen of this country. Like, it's just all crazy. And you know, to the idea that they're going to try to arrest and detain 3,000 people a day. I mean, that is an insane amount of people. Where are we getting the resources for that? Because we already saw in the oversight hearings with the Department of Homeland Security, this was, I don't know, 2 weeks ago now, that that department is set to run out of money by July, I believe. So how are they going to do that? Are they just going to somehow appropriate funds from every other governmental agency in service of this one really callous, horrible, cruel goal that they have? I mean, it just doesn't even make any sense. The resources that it would take to detain 3,000 people a day is not something that I can even comprehend. And what, like, we're just gonna have ICE agents like trolling every city street looking for people? That's
And
crazy.
there's no due process, so they can literally round anyone up that they want to meet a quota, and a quota itself is dangerous. A quota itself
Absolutely.
is dangerous.
Absolutely. Because that means that instead of focusing on, okay, if you want to believe what they said initially, which I don't see how anyone could, but if their focus is on removing people with criminal records, right? That's what they say. It was the most dangerous among people here. How focusing on removing 3,000 people from the country, that is a different thing. That is a wholly different thing than removing people with criminal records from the country. And the idea that we could possibly have 3,000 people per day that have criminal records that need to be removed from this country is absurd. It's insane.
Absolutely.
Yeah,
But they're going to be using, which is our next article, um, all kinds of different types of artificial intelligence in order to carry out and target people. And of course, those systems are flawed.
absolutely. So the article that Zaina is setting up is a really good short one from 404 Media, who does a lot of really good work. So from 404 Media, ICE taps into nationwide AI-enabled camera network. Data shows data from a license plate scanning tool that is primarily marketed as a surveillance solution for small towns to combat crimes like carjackings or finding missing people is being used by ICE, according to data reviewed by 404 Media. Local police around the country are performing lookups in Flock's AI-powered automated license plate reader ALPR system for immigration-related searches and as part of other ICE investigations, giving federal law enforcement side door access to a tool that currently it does not have a formal contract for. The massive trove of lookup data was obtained by researchers who asked to remain anonymous to avoid potential retaliation and shared with 404 Media. It shows more than 4,000 nation and statewide lookups by local and state police done either at the behest of the federal government as an informal favor to federal law enforcement or with a potential immigration focus, according to statements from police departments and sheriff offices collected by 404 Media. It shows that while Flock does not have a contract with ICE, the agency sources data from Flock's cameras by making requests to local law enforcement. The data reviewed by 404 was obtained by using a public records request from the Danville, Illinois Police Department and shows the Flock search logs from police departments around the country. As part of a flock search, police have to provide a reason they're performing the lookup. In the reason field for searches of Danville's cameras, officers from across the U.S. wrote immigration, ICE and ERO, which is ICE's enforcement and removal operations, the section that focuses on deportations, illegal immigration, ICE warrant, and other immigration-related reasons, although lookups mentioning ICE occurred across both the Biden and Trump administrations. All of the lookups that explicitly list immigration as their reason were made after Trump was inaugurated, according to the data. So they are using data from a license plate scanning tool that is supposed to help small towns combat, like, things like carjackings, they said, or missing people. That's what ICE is tapping into. And they're doing it, as 404 Media noted, without any kind of contract to be doing that. So they're not allowed to be doing that. And they are aware that they do not have access to this data, which is why they have to go through local law enforcement who aren't going to tell them no, because they're part of the same apparatus, so they don't care. And I'm sure they're more than happy to provide this information to ICE and their agents. And I mean, that is just sick. That is just sick. And that opens the door for so much other use of AI as a weapon. Because of course.
After the Patriot Act, one of the things that people were blowing the whistle on in 2003 and 2004 especially was the internet, or the national networking of these camera systems and the CCTV TV systems and others, and these mass surveillance systems that were getting implemented in the early 2000s to mid 2000s, all the way into the 2010s, and continue to happen. People have been against this for years. But when the Department of Homeland Security was established through the Patriot Act following 9/11 and inwards into the Gulf War, one of the red flags everyone was stating from this is these AI systems are going to be used in an improper manner to bypass the Fourth Amendment and right to due process, right to search and seizure, or right to warrants with search and seizure. All of these protections that we supposedly have under the Constitution, these CCTV and other types of video, surpasses that, because they can listen to just, and I'm saying I mean government institutions such as the Department of Homeland Security can listen to basically anything they want to listen to when they give requests to these private phone companies now, with digital access to information. There's so much that can be done now without a warrant. And now through AI, we're basically looking at almost a stop and frisk system on a national level, but not just through the eyes of a single police officer, but through the eyes of an AI that is programmed to search for people under a certain demographic. This is racist as shit. This is an extraordinarily racist process. Who are they going to be targeting? Probably not a white dude walking down the street as a migrant, I would assume.
Absolutely. And I mean, I feel like there have been studies that indicated that AI has a problem with these things.
Absolutely.
That it's, racism is kind of just built into the software of AI. So, I mean, yeah, I fully agree with everything that you said, that no good can come from this. No good can come from this. And again, as you said, like, this is just building off of abuses that have been longstanding. And now we are at, kind of, I don't want to say like the end point of this, because we're not. We are nowhere near seeing what the end point of any of this is. But it's extremely scary. It is.
And how does any conservative support this? I'm sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt. Go ahead.
No. I mean, I think that's a good point. Like, how do conservatives support this? Because they're, I'm sure, as you're going to say, part of the party that is supposed to be, all for personal freedoms.
personal freedoms, liberty. I mean, as far as I can remember, most libertarians I knew, most people that were Republicans, people that kind of swung more toward the right, were against mass surveillance, against big tech, against government agencies spying on us. How can you support it now just because it's the Trump administration and maybe it's a president that you like in other ways? You're going to support this massive, massive overreach? Do you really hate migrants that much that you would be willing to throw away your civil liberties? Do you believe that that's actually going to help us? Or do you believe that that's going to be a way that the government is going to, in turn, find other ways to control the population, especially poor people? What do you think is the more logical outcome? I would ask those people.
Yeah. No, I feel exactly the same. I don't know what justification there is besides just blatant, explicit racism. I don't know. And people's brains being just so warped by, their own struggles in this country. Because as we know, working people, no matter, it's not a partisan issue. People are struggling, and I think that for a lot of people, that struggle embitters them entirely, and they're very vulnerable then to, when people are unable to pay their own bills, to provide what they need to provide for their families. They become vulnerable to this kind of messaging. They become vulnerable to, the idea that somebody else took their job, somebody else, is taking the benefits that were meant for them as a citizen of this country. And I think that, a lot of that is just that. And the problems that they are facing are very real, but the conclusion that they have reached is extremely wrong.
Absolutely.
Absolutely.
Speaking of conclusions going in
Yes.
the wrong direction, we were going to cover some of what was happening in Gaza and give an update on that.
Yeah.
Horrors, just
Yeah,
it's
absolutely. I'm
it's
gonna
something that it's the final solution for the quote unquote Palestinian question. That's what we're looking at right now. It's horrific.
absolutely. And I'm gonna try to keep this as brief as possible. I have my eye on the time. I understand that it's, like 6:15. I'm sure Zaina has other things that she has to get to. So we'll try to get through the rest of this as quickly as we can. But yeah, this is, I don't know. I mean, as far as Palestine goes, it's so hard to even talk about this, a year and a half after. So the piece that we're going to talk about is a Mondo Weiss piece. So the Mondo Weiss piece, Israel says it will soon occupy 75% of Gaza, and it's using control over aid to do it. So this is the piece. Israel plans on concentrating Palestinians into isolated camps within Gaza after it takes over 75% of the territory, luring Palestinians into those zones by using aid as bait. So I'm not going to read this whole thing. But the piece goes, Hamas and the U.S. reportedly reached an understanding for a comprehensive ceasefire agreement in Gaza, but the Israeli government publicly rejected it and declared it unacceptable, according to Dropsite News on Monday. While the state of the latest round of ceasefire negotiations remains uncertain, the Israeli army announced on Sunday that it is planning on taking over 75% of Gaza and corralling its population into 3 concentrated zones across the Strip. Israeli military sources told Haaretz that the Israeli army would take over this territory within 2 months and move Gaza's population to 3 locations: Gaza City, the refugee camps of the central Gaza Strip, in Deir al-Balah, and the coastal Mawasi area of Khan Yunis. The news comes amid worsening famine conditions in Gaza following a months-long Israeli blockade, preventing the entry of food to the Strip. Israel had announced a week ago that the distribution of aid through international organizations would be halted to be replaced by a new aid delivery mechanism implemented by Israel under the auspices of a U.S.-backed private contractor, forcing Palestinians to move to designated distribution centers to receive limited rations, where they will be subject to security checks and biometric scanning. So I'm going to stop there. That tells you, most of what's happening right now, or, the current developments that are going on right now. I mean, this is insane. They're trying to move, if we can believe the numbers of people who are still left in Gaza, they're trying to move, like, I think 2.2 million people into 3 different sites. So 3 different locations. They're trying to move everybody that is left in Gaza to those places. Like, that is insane. That is insane. And they're using those sites. They're trying to, as the title suggests, they're luring people to those camps, those prison camps, with the promise of aid. So food. So they're using food as to get people to remove themselves. I don't know. It's like, again,
Under the guise that Hamas has been stealing that food, which has been heavily debunked by multiple national organizations, including debunked by John McCain's widow, just this week. Hamas is not necessarily stealing food en masse. That is not factual. As you had said, this is an aim to corral people into a specific region. The last time this has happened, probably 12, 13 cycles throughout this genocide. The
Mhm.
first time was on October 11th, when the Israel military warned 1.5 million people to flee to the south into Rafah,
Mhm.
saying that they were not going to bomb Rafah. Only 3 months later, 2 months later, completely decimating Rafah as
Yeah.
well. So they've done this already. They did this with the north of Gaza. Now they're just concentrating it more and more. I remember about 4 months into this onslaught, into this horrific genocide, Israel released this map through these flyers, and it had all these little zones that were quote unquote zones that Palestinians could go into. Most of it was considered not safe, but there were these little pockets
Right.
where 2 million people could go. And I want to remind people, Gaza is about the size of Chicago.
Yeah. It is an already tiny area that, is shrinking. Or, shouldn't say shrinking. I mean, most of it has been leveled. There isn't anything left to shrink at this point. It's, they, as you said, did what they wanted to do. This is the final step. The final step. These areas will get smaller and smaller and smaller. And as you're suggesting, why would we think they're going to do anything besides move all of these people to these 3 new camps and then bomb them? That's
I
what they've done
believe
this whole time.
this Mando Weiss article is correct in that the food is the need for aid will be the initiative to help people move, but people will be forced to move with threats of military. I mean, obviously threats of military presence as well, since they are saying specifically we are taking over 75% of the strip. So
Within
not only are they going to starve people that are unable to relocate in this impossible ask, how are you going to move in an area? Think about it. This is an area the size of Chicago, and they're wanting to move almost 2 million people, probably a lot less by now, sadly and heartbreakingly, because we don't have accurate numbers of people that have been murdered by the Israeli regime, moved into basically a neighborhood or a block. And a block that has zero infrastructure because it's been leveled. How's that going to work?
It's not going to. It is, as you're suggesting, it is not going to work. And, the bait that they're using to lure people into, like, such tiny areas that we could not possibly imagine being packed into quarters like that. But the bait that they're using is being distributed by Israel with our help.
Absolutely.
I mean, and to the exclusion of, international, like legitimate aid operations. And the idea that they're going to be providing those people with enough food, enough water, medical supplies, of course they're not. Maybe, the just enough to keep them alive so that they can't have the international community come down on them for like, no, you are like, people are just mass dying of starvation. Not that they aren't, because they are, but there is a line that they seem to recognize.
Well, Bezalel Smotrich actually said, and I believe that he is still, he's the minister. He was the minister of finance. I believe that he has a higher rank within the IDF as well. Just said last week, one plate of food is all that they need. One plate of food. That's it. And that would be enough. Outwardly said, that will be enough to maintain Western support. So we have to give them at least one plate of food so that they can continue getting Western support. And then he said they don't need any more and basically dehumanize them again as less than people.
I hadn't seen that.
Outwardly bragging about the tactic to maintain Western support while saying that they will remove all Palestinians and they will be taking over the entire Gaza Strip.
I cannot understand the lack of humanity that would allow you to think that thought. And not just think it, but say it. And then also have an entire, like, they've acted on it at such a scale that, like, again, like, it just, like, I know that that's a hardly coherent statement, but like, it just doesn't make any sense to me. I don't understand how this has been able to progress to the point that it has, because this is a group of just people. Like, this is children. And we have another clip that I wanted to play just to kind of, remind everyone who is not on Twitter or whatever all the time and isn't constantly seeing this on their feeds, like I think a lot of us are at this point. There is a clip of a little girl in a school that was bombed and burning, and you can see her trying to escape. So, Colin, if you could play that clip. Yeah. So that is a little girl who woke up to that and is trying to escape. And, I didn't want to play this to like torture everyone. Watching all of these things and seeing all of these things across my feed for the last year and a half has definitely impacted me quite a bit. During the beginning of the now genocide, I was, archiving stuff like this that I saw. And I think after 3 or 4 months, I stopped because I kind of couldn't take it anymore. And, I understand the privilege that I have in being able to stop doing that and not have it constantly in my face. But seeing all of that again, it takes an effect. It has an effect on your mental health for sure.
How can anyone see this human being, this child, waking up in an inferno that was man-made by the Israeli military, which we support? We provide those weapons that they use to carry out these mass atrocities and war crimes, and be like, and not react to that. I don't understand. If this was any US city, if this was Houston, if this was Boston, if this was New York, if this was Tallahassee, this is all the world would be talking about. And all the world would be continuously showing this image. They would be sharing the story of Hind Rajab. But they're not, because of the mass propagandized dehumanization campaign that has gone. But 70% of the country wants this to end. 70% of the country, so the majority of the country do not support these atrocities. But our government is not doing a damn thing to stop it.
No, we are doing the opposite.
Yeah.
We are
We're
doing the
enabling
opposite. We are enabling it. We are fueling it. We are doing everything that we can to make sure that it continues. I mean, I agree with everything that you said. I don't understand. I don't know. I don't get it. So again, that was a reminder of what's actually going on. So, because it's one thing to be reading these articles and be hearing, you know, kind of secondhand what's happening, but we have access to all of it. We know exactly what's going on. We know what it looks like because all of it's being recorded and we have access to all of it. So for anyone who, you know, is not perennially online, here's another reminder of what's going on and why people have been protesting against it for the last year and a half. So I wanted to, after that, we'll do a little bit of a palate cleanser and move on to Jordan's piece. And we'll, again, it's 6:24, so we will do this.
Did you want to briefly, we can just briefly talk about the, because I know a lot of people in the comments were asking about it, the John Farina's court case. Showing the Hin Rajab, this is why it's so critically important that Hin Rajab, or were you wanting to do, I got a little lost, I'm sorry. Did you
No, go
want
ahead.
Did you want to do Jordan's piece first and then talk about
I want to hear everything that you had to say, and then we can move on to Jordan's piece.
Okay. So it's very important to note that one of the things that's going to start happening more and more and more is that journalists are going to start being blocked from doing coverage of pro-Palestine protest. And there is going to be a chilling effect. We're already seeing it with speech such as the words pro-Palestine. And then there's other phrases that are being blocked by, you know, tech companies, but then also governmentally. John Farina and 3 journalists are suing Brooklyn College because they were refused and denied access to cover a protest there. When was it? Last week or week before last?
I want to say it was about 2 weeks ago. I was not with John that day. I was working on something else, so I didn't go with him. I want to say this was about 2 weeks ago. So they moved fast. They moved really quickly on this.
Yeah, and we don't necessarily have to pull up the article for it, but I do commend those journalists for fighting back and for filing a lawsuit against Brooklyn College for denying them access, because this is the only way that we're going to be able to fight back. And people have limited resources. So kudos to John Farina. Kudos to the more than 100 protests he's covered. We have a video on that and some of the overview of coverage for the last year and a half that is on our Status Coup YouTube. Please go check it out. And if you can, please help support us at StatusCoup /join. It's $5 a month. That helps to keep people like John Farina on the ground, keep us covering these protests so that we can continue to bring you this information and so that we can continue to fight or even build up the resources to fight if we have to, in order to be able to keep reporting, because that's likely coming down the pike. So if you can, please donate, please help us out. And again, kudos to John and to those reporters for fighting back on that. And I wish them well with their case.
Absolutely. Agree with all of that. And hopefully maybe we can hear more from John on what's happening with this. Because as you said, this was really happy to hear that this was going on. I didn't know that they were doing this. John and I were covering something else and we're hanging in the car. We were waiting for something to start and he got a call and I just happened to overhear that this was happening. And then he told me after. I thought, well, shit, that's awesome. Like, very cool that they're doing this. Really, really happy that they're, you know, pursuing this. So again, maybe we can hear more from John on what's
there. We'll get some updates for sure.
we will do that. So yeah, everything that you said, That is all great. So I think the last thing that we're going to get to today is Jordan's piece. So this is his latest piece in Substack, and just so that you guys know, we're talking about supporting us so that we can do more of this coverage that John is now suing over, which is excellent. We are also going to be doing more on Substack. So Jordan and I are going to be writing more pieces on Substack. We're going to be focusing a little bit more on our presence there. So we will have more content for you. That's not going to take away from anything else that we're doing. It's just going to be more stuff. So do keep an eye on our Substack for all of the things that we have going on there. So this latest piece from Jordan, why the real Biden cover-up was hatched before he took office. CNN's Jake Tapper is being celebrated for co-authoring a book exposing the Biden presidential cover-up of his cognitive decline, but the reality is Tapper and co. covered it up in the first place. So, Jordan wrote, as Trump 2.0 descends into full-on fascism, there is no way to defeat him or the next iteration of him without acknowledging and rectifying one of the biggest reasons the nation got to this point. A year before the 2020 general election, to anyone with functioning eyes and ears, it was abundantly clear that Joe Biden was not capable of running for president, much less fully or effectively carrying out the duties of president. That is, of course, anyone but CNN's Jake Tapper, the co-author of the much buzzed about new Biden presidential tell-all, Original Sin, or his cadre of cohorts from the sewers of CNN, MSNBC, New York Times, Washington Post, Politico, and the rest of the Beltway blowhards. I would just pause to see if you have any thoughts on that, Zaina, and also to say, we didn't need MSNBC, CNN, whoever else to tell us that Joe Biden was basically not functional. If you watched him, you knew. If you watched him, and for those of us who remember him as vice president, I would like to say not that long ago, the difference between him in his presidential term versus him as vice president is night and day. He had aged. He was older and just not capable at all of fulfilling the duties of that office. And again, if you saw him, you would be able to see that.
Absolutely. And, we caught so much hell when Biden was still running for president for pointing out the fact, and this was 2 years ago, for pointing out the fact that he was in decline. There were a lot of people who watched the show or people that watched our content that were upset because, they were saying, well, this could give us Trump if we admit that Biden, has these issues. So there was so much propaganda telling us that he was fit, from AOC to Bernie to the pundits to Jake Tapper himself, saying that there are no signs of cognitive decline. You have to see how he works on the back end, But we reported on it very early on when we first started seeing, he started making public appearances again. Because for a while he barely had any press conferences and made any public appearances till he started running. And we were like, whoa. And Jordan talked about it and we talked about it and people gave us hell about that. And I think here Jordan goes through some of the things that we had pointed out on the show.
Yeah.
And it's because it's important. If the person who is sitting in the White House is having some kind of cognitive distress, and then you have to ask the question, literally, who's running the country then?
Absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. So as you said, Jordan did run down some of these. I'm going to read them because I think that we should go through them. So he does say before he gets to that, that's why as early as 2019, I was doing what actual journalists should do, which you just outlined, Zaina, accurately report what was evident to objective, critically thinking individuals. In video after video, I pointed out that contrary to the political journalists spinning Biden's verbal diarrhea as gaffes or a lifelong stutter that somehow never appeared during his 40-year Senate VP career, Biden was clearly showing alarming signs of cognitive deterioration. For those who need a refresher on the 2020 campaign trail, the full demands of which, to Biden's good fortune, were sharply reduced due to the COVID pandemic, candidate Biden, and here's the bulleted list of the things that he did that made us all think that maybe he was not fit for office. He forgot President Obama's name, flailing to remember the man he served to the point he could only muster, "my boss." Confused President Trump with President George W. Bush, flubbed labeling himself an Obama-Biden Democrat, bizarrely calling himself an Biden-Obama Democrat, pitched himself as running for the U.S. Senate rather than the presidency, confused Fox News and anchor Chris Wallace with NBC's Chuck Todd, confused British Prime Minister Theresa May with long-dead British PM Margaret Thatcher, jumbled the Declaration of Independence's "all men and women are created equally," fumbled the phrase "we choose truth over lies" instead uttering "we choose truth over facts," falsely claimed he worked as a coal miner, was shot at in Iraq, and marched in the civil rights movement. Falsely claimed he was arrested in South Africa trying to see Nelson Mandela in prison. Wrongly claimed he met with Parkland shooting survivors while he was VP. The shooting happened 2 years later. Said poor kids are just as bright and just as talented as white kids before quickly correcting white with rich kids. FYI, this is just a partial list as I'm limited on time caring for my 1-month-old and a 2-year-old tugging at me. So I'm laughing. I remember the majority of these. This was not that long ago. I don't see how anyone could have witnessed even one of these things and thought, yes, this is the person that I'm voting for president. This is the person that I want in control of the free world. This is the person I feel safe having.
Right. And an occasional gaffe and slip up is going to happen every once in a while.
Sure.
But it was the mounting tide of it, the mounting tide of incoherence that, we were seeing that became concerning. You confuse a few things. I don't want to be ableist and be like, I'm dyslexic. I have dyspraxia. I confuse things sometimes. And I know after COVID, sometimes people have trouble recalling a word, for instance, but that doesn't mean that but this was a layered instance after instance after instance after instance. You can overlook a few, but then at the point where he's getting confused of where to even walk off stage and he's having to be guided everywhere and he's looking at someone and calling them the wrong name, or he's recalling Margaret Thatcher, it gets to a point where the evidence outpaces the thought of, well, everyone makes mistakes occasionally.
Yeah, and I think, I agree with all of that. I think we talked about this briefly. I also have autoimmune diseases, some of which do, cause like brain fog, those kinds of things. So I feel similarly. I have every sympathy with something happening sometimes. And if you're tired, and you already struggle with those things, sometimes you say something stupid. I know I have. So I'm not trying to say that everyone has to be perfect at all times.
Yeah,
I'm
absolutely.
certainly not, and I don't judge anyone like that. But we can all tell the difference between someone who is, having an off day and someone who is just declining rapidly and is not capable of doing their job anymore. And unfortunately, old age is not something that you can do anything about. Those kind of mental capacities start to diminish. My 2 grandparents passed away a few months ago. A few months ago. And, I took care of them a lot as they were kind of declining. My grandmother had very bad dementia. I can see what happens when someone is old and afflicted with cognitive issues because they have aged, which is a wholly separate thing from someone who has some other, kind of disease, something that affects your cognitive abilities. That's something else. This was just, he got old.
The sheer narcissism that he was unwilling, and the Democratic Party was unwilling to say, okay, primaries, let's have someone else. It shouldn't be this guy. And then they waited and then pushed someone upon us without a primary when they pushed Kamala Harris upon us. That is crazy. And I think it's absolutely asinine that Jake Tapper gets to come out here, write a book, go on a massive media tour after lying to us for 4 years. You lied to us, dude, and then you held on to this information. I mean, imagine if Status Coup, if Jordan was like, I knew this deep, dark secret, but I held on to it. We didn't report on it for you so that we could bring it out after Trump was president. And like, why didn't he report on this while it was happening? He held on to it so that he could make this big splash and make this money. That is crazy.
Yeah, no, I 100% agree. It was advantageous for him to not say anything, and so he didn't. That's it. And it's it's the same with everybody else who now is coming out of the woodwork saying, "Oh, well, I noticed." Like you just said, they noticed. They said nothing because they were worried that it could hurt their careers by saying something. And like that, it's inexcusable. It's inexcusable, and especially for a journalist. Like, that is your whole job. That is the entirety of your job, to tell people things that they need to know. What could be more important than alerting the public that the president of the United States is not capable of being the president of the United States?
Jordan Tapper gaslit us for 4 years and then wrote a book about it, and somehow is still making, 7 figures.
Yeah. Of course. And the rest of us, who have some principles, are not making 7 figures on book deals. So I don't know. I don't know if you have any other thoughts on Biden and his.
Is there a secret plot? We can text Jordan and see if there's some sort of secret plot we could roll out in a year, and I'll make bank.
Yeah, maybe there's another aging politician that we can out after they're already like dead or something. What it doesn't actually affect anything, doesn't have any again effect on what's actually happening on the ground. And the Democrats are dropping like flies. So
yeah,
it's
it's horrible. They stayed in, and then Conley knew he had the problems he had and decided to run anyway. And that's something that Jordan spoke about as well. Like, why the hell is Jerry Conley still running? Like, what is going on here? Why are so many still running when, retire, for God's sakes? You got unlimited health care. You've got all this money. Retire. Do that.
Yeah, you would think that some of those people at least have like families that they want to spend time with, and they have made a lot of money. Like, go spend it. Go be with your families. Go do something. Like, don't torture the rest of us. And I say that jokingly, but it's not a joke. I covered this in another piece, and I'm struggling to remember why I was talking about this. It was earlier this week, but the one big beautiful bill passed through the House because 3 Democrats died this year.
Absolutely.
That is why that happened. So it's funny to joke around about this and their own stupidity and their narcissism by staying in office well beyond a reasonable time. But this has material effects on the rest of us. So again, Trump's one big beautiful bill only went through because it lost by 1 vote and 3 Democrats died. Jerry Connolly passed away earlier that week.
Absolutely.
So it's, their narcissism is punishing all of us.
But yet there's so many that are within the liberal media that yell at third-party voters or independents or people that didn't as the true cruxus of the blame for where we are. But obviously those in power are the problem, and that included.
Absolutely. All right, guys. We went way over. So I'm gonna do super chats, and then Zane and I I'm gonna go eat dinner. That's what I'm gonna do. I'm gonna eat cheese and crackers for dinner. So we're gonna go do that. We will let you all go. Let Zaina go get on with her night. But again, first, we're going to read super chats, and also we have a new member. So welcome, Jess. Thank you for joining Status Coup. So this is from Gina from New York. She's been a member for 1 month. Level status cool, and she says, "Thank you all for telling the truth. You are welcome. We are trying our best, Gina." And the next one is from Big Dumb Animal. They say, "Paying restitution for my stupid questions. Is the B in Zaina's name silent? If so, can I yell at Layla over at PUP?"
No, Lila's right. It's Zainab, but I go by Zaina as well. So they're both correct. Lila's not wrong. And also, the B isn't exactly silent, but Zaina's short. It's like Bob. Is Bob a short for something? Bartholomew. I don't know. Dave and
Bob,
David. There we
for
go. That's a
Robert.
better example.
So, okay, I'm just going to admit I didn't know that. Also, when Jordan sent, I'm calling out Jordan here. Sorry, Jordan. But when he sent me your contact, it's spelled Zana. So I just thought maybe that was like your nickname, your way of making it easier for people to know how to pronounce your name. Do you ever spell your name Zana so that people know how to pronounce it? But also, I'm finding not quite correctly.
Yes, Zaina is short. It's sort of like an Americanized version of Zainab. Zainab was Muhammad's daughter. It's spelled a lot of different ways. Zainab. There's like 10, 20 different spellings in the Middle East. But in the United States, a lot of people do use Zaina instead, Zana. So I took that short in high school, in college, and later on. So I go by Zaina, Zanaday, a lot of times. So it's sort of like I was saying, like Dave and David. So when you say Zaina, you say it like that. But then my name is also Zainab. So it's
Gotcha.
both. One's just sort of the short for the other one.
Okay, so I'm just making sure I'm learning. I'm learning about and your nicknames and everything. That is a beautiful name, though. I mean, your parents they did a good job.
They did. No, I'm just kidding.
No, you should
Thank you.
like your name. It's very cool. My name is boring.
No,
Just
it's not.
nothing.
Ashley's a great name.
I feel like growing up in the early 90s, like every show that had like a bitchy girl in it, her name was always Ashley. So I feel like I've learned to associate my name with that. Yours is much cooler. So
Don't remake it. Ashley's now a badass on the ground journalist. That's what it stands for these days.
I'll take that. I will take that. If there are no other super chats, then I will say.
Okay, yeah, I was confirming that's all of them.
Okay, thanks, Colin. So yeah, we are done for the night. Thank you so much, Zaina. This was fun. I'm glad that we finally got to discuss the tornado and everything, and we will be back soon. So thank you guys for hanging with us, and we will see you all soon.
See you guys soon.
Bye.